Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I thought we'd take a look at some reading stats for 2021. I love stats, I know some of you do as well, so I thought it would be fun to take a look at my 2021 reading, see if there are any surprises maybe, any changes. I will try to compare the numbers a little bit to my 2020 numbers just so you can see the changes, if there are any. Spoiler alert. There are some changes and some surprises as well. At least it was surprising to me when I looked at these numbers. I have two different reading spreadsheets that I use to get these stats out of. I actually used them both in 2021 because I wasn't sure which one I preferred, so I decided to use them both just to see. For 2022 I've actually kind of combined the two. I've taken the things that I like the best from both of them and I've put them together, and I've also added some things myself that I wanted to track. So yeah, they're both great spreadsheets. I will link them down below. One of the spreadsheets is from Hardback Hoarder here on YouTube, and the other one is from Let's Read, also here on YouTube. So I will link to their videos where they talk about these spreadsheets and where you can find links to them and stuff like that. So yeah, I totally recommend those if you're looking for good reading spreadsheets. And you can always like tweak them to kind of fit your own wishes as well. So that's always great. But yeah, let's get into the stats and let's start with how many books I read in 2021. And I ended up reading 117 books. And the funny thing about that is that the year before, in 2020, I read 118 books. So I had pretty much exactly the same number, one book less. I was aware of this by the end of the year, and you know, I actually tried to get time to squeeze in another book before the end of the year just so I could have the exact same number, but I just didn't have the time, so you know, I ended up with 117. But you know, that's a great number, and at least I'm consistent when it comes to how many books I read in a year. So that was kind of funny. When it comes to the number of pages I read, on the other hand, that's where I got my first big surprise when I looked at these stats. Because I ended up with 32,645 pages for 2021. And I had no idea how many pages I had the year before, so when I first looked at this number, I didn't really have anything, you know, to tell me whether this was a good number or not. But then I looked at the number for 2020, and I had 42,233 books. So I read almost 10,000 pages less in 2021, and like I was so surprised by that because I didn't really feel like I was reading any less in 2021, so I couldn't really understand that it was that much, because that's a really significant change, and I couldn't really understand why. And then, you know, I started to look further into the stats, and I kind of got an explanation after a while, and we will look at that number a little bit later in this video. But yeah, significant change in the number of pages that I read. 10,000 pages less than the year before, so that was definitely a surprise. The average pages per book for 2021 was 282 approximately. This is not a very high number, but it totally makes sense to me because I read a lot of romances in 2021 and they tend to be shorter than a lot of other books. In 2020 my average pages was 351, so it's definitely gone significantly down. But like I said, it wasn't really surprising to me to see that. The typical romance book is probably somewhere between 200 and 300 pages, so you know that the number was somewhere between there wasn't surprising to me at all. When we look at my average rating for 2021, I ended up with 3.74 stars. This is a higher number than the year before, and it's also a more accurate number than I had in 2020, because in 2020 I only had my Goodreads stat, which said that my average rating was 3.5. But as you all know, on Goodreads you can't put in half stars, which I usually do. And when I read a book that is, for instance, a 4.5 stars for me, I will usually give it 4 stars on Goodreads. So that number is always going to be a little bit lower than the real number is. So, but for 2021, I actually had this number in my spreadsheet. So I ended up with 3.4 stars. So, you know, this stat is not like very accurate, I think, but it still gives me an idea that I've overall enjoyed my books a little bit more in 2021 compared to the year before, which is my feeling as well. So it makes sense to me, even though this particular stat is not like 100% accurate. Then let's look at books by month, like which month was my best reading month and which month was my worst. And hopefully editing me can put up some like graphics and stuff on the screen as well. Maybe I should actually do this so that I have a little bit more space over here to put in some stats. So my best reading month in 2021 was June. I read 16 books in June. And I'm trying to remember why I read so many books in that particular month, but I am pretty sure I actually did 2 readathons that month. And for readathons, I will typically try and read maybe shorter books so I can fit more books in and cross off some prompts and stuff. So I think that's probably part of the reason. And I also think that I know that May was one of my worst reading months if you look at how many books I read, but I think that's just because I started some books at the end of May that I probably finished in June. So that affects my June number as well, I think. So yeah, 16 books is my best month, and June is actually also my best month when it comes to pages. I read 3,603 pages in June, so June was definitely my best reading month. And when you look at my worst month, that was September. I only read 6 books in September, and when it comes to pages, I read 1,918 pages in September. So it wasn't a very good reading month, and I don't really have an explanation for that. I can't remember if there was anything different about September. But the funny thing is that September was actually my worst reading month in 2020 as well. And I have no idea why. There's nothing really going on in my life in September that I can think of, so I don't know why that month tend to be like my worst month, and I don't read as much, but you know, that's apparently just how it is. So it'll be interesting to see if the same happens in 2022, because, you know, it seems to be a little bit of a trend there. Then let's look at books by type, or rather, you know, if I read more standalones or more books that are part of a series. And my number for 2021 is not too surprising, I feel like. I read 48 books that were standalones and 68 books that were part of series. Which means about 41% standalones and 58% series. And again, not too surprising because I do read a lot of romances now, and those tend to be part of a series. A lot of them are. So this one makes sense to me. The funny thing is that my number for 2020 were pretty similar, except it was the other way around. In 2020, I read 57% standalones and 42% series. But you know, that's just a funny thing. This number does make sense to me, like I said, so yeah. Then let's look at genres that I read. This is not very surprising to me, really. I'll put the chart up on here on the screen so you can see. I'm not going to go through every number. The biggest change from the year before is the romance part. I read 62 books that were romance in 2021, and that is 53% of my reading. So, you know, about half of my reading is romance now, which, you know, not surprising to me. It has been my favorite genre over this past year. So, you know, that is the biggest change. Romance has gone up, and pretty much all the other genres has gone down a little bit. The one exception to that is actually nonfiction. I've read more nonfiction in 2021 than I did the year before. I did have not exactly a goal, but I think I said in a video sometime at the beginning of the year that I was hoping to read more nonfiction, and I did make an effort to do that. So even though 7 books in a year is not that much, it's still more, because I think, let's see, in 2020 I read 4 nonfiction, so I almost doubled that number, so pretty happy with that. But yeah, like I said, everything else has gone down a little bit. Fantasy is the genre that I read from most aside from romance. I read 13 fantasy books in 2021. That is 11% of my reading, which doesn't sound like a lot, but obviously fantasy books tends to be long, and some of them are very long. So I think, you know, I've read more fantasy than what it looks like. But let's look at the same chart only with looking at pages instead of books, because that one is slightly different. You will see that the romance part has gone down pretty significantly, and pretty much every other part of this chart has gone up. And that's again because the romance books that I read tend to be shorter than pretty much all other types of books that I read. So it makes sense that when you look at pages, the romance part will be significantly smaller, and the other parts, especially fantasy, will be bigger. So that's just a little funny thing to look at. But I've definitely read more romance this year, and it's by far my biggest genre now. Then let's look at intended audience, because here is also a pretty significant change. I read by far the most adult books in 2021. 95 of the books that I read were adult books, so 81% of my reading. Then I read 17 books that were YA, so 15% of my reading. I read 2 books that I considered middle grade, which is about 2% of my reading, probably a little bit lower than that actually. And then I read 3 books that I considered new adult, so about 3% of my reading. When I think about it, the new adult number might be a little bit higher, because I tend to forget that I have the new adult category, so I put everything that isn't YA and middle grade into adult a lot of the time. So some of my adult books might have been new adult, but I think it's pretty accurate. If you look at 2020, I read 57% adult books and 48% YA. So I definitely read a lot more adult books now, and not so much YA anymore. If you go back 2 years, YA was actually my biggest number. I was reading, I looked at it yesterday, I think I read like 58% YA in 2019. So it's been a big change in this category over the past few years, and I think it will continue that way. I'm just not that interested in YA anymore. There are some exceptions, of course. There are still great YA books being published and great YA books that I want to read, but overall I'm just leaning more and more towards adult books, which makes sense, I guess. When you look at the author's gender, that one is actually pretty similar to the year before. I read 38 books by authors that were male, so about 32%. I read 75 books by female authors, so 64%. I read 1 book that were written by both a male and a female, and then I read 3 books by an author that identify as non-binary. So like I said, it's pretty much the same as the year before. The change is actually that I've read from more male authors this year, or in 2021. Not a significant change, but a little bit more male authors than the year before, because in 2020 I read about 25% male authors. But still, I definitely read most of my books from female authors, and I don't really see that changing. That has been pretty consistent over the past few years, I think. When you look at format, there is a pretty significant change as well, because now I definitely read more ebooks than any other format. So I read 65 ebooks in 2021, which is 55% of my books. Then I read 32 physical books, which is 27% of my books. Then I read 18 audiobooks, so 15% of my books. And then I also read 2 ARCs, which is about 1.7% of my books. And the real big change here, there are 2 things really. The year before I only read 21% ebooks, so that has definitely changed. But I was really surprised to see how few audiobooks I read in 2021 compared to the year before. And I think here is where, that page count or that page number for the year comes in as well, because I read like 20 less audiobooks in 2021 compared to the year before. And obviously that has to be quite a lot of pages as well. So I think this is the reason why my total number of pages is so low. I knew I had read less audiobooks in 2021 because I've just been listening to more and more podcasts. So now I'm kind of splitting my listening time between audiobooks and podcasts. It's about 50-50, I think. So I knew the number would go down a little bit, but I didn't expect it to go down this much. Because, I only listen to half the amount of audiobooks now compared to the year before. So yeah, this was a very surprising changed to me. I didn't really see this number coming. And I definitely want to try and do something about that in 2022. I feel like I will still continue listening to podcasts because I just enjoy them, and I don't want to give them up in favor of audiobooks. But 18 books for the entire year, that doesn't sound like a lot compared to how many books I read, and compared to how many audiobooks I've listened to before or in previous years. So this was a very surprising number to me, and it definitely explains the page count, because initially I couldn't understand that number, but now it kind of makes sense. So yeah. Then we have star rating. I'm not going to go through every number. I'll just kind of put the chart up here so you can see the overall impression, and I think you could see that in my average rating for the year as well, is that overall I give slightly higher ratings now than I used to. So my ratings for 2021 overall were just a little bit higher, or rather I give out more of the higher ratings, so 4 stars, 4.5 stars, and 5 stars. I give out just slightly more of those, which like I mentioned earlier in the video, makes sense to me because I feel like I'm overall enjoying my books a little bit more now compared to some of the previous years. So this totally makes sense to me, and also I love that this is happening because I feel like I'm just getting better and better at finding the type of books that I will enjoy, and I generally just tend to love and enjoy more of the books that I read now. So I hope it continues in that direction because I'm just loving that. Let's quickly look at page length as well. I kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, but most of the books that I read are between 200 and 299 pages. I mentioned it before, the romance books that I read are typically in that range, so this number is not surprising to me, and I'm expecting this to kind of be the same for 2022 as well, because I see myself continue reading a lot of romances in 2022 as well. Another number that is kind of interesting is that I read quite a lot of books that are 100 pages, which I'm not sure if we can even call a book, but as you may have noticed if you've been following me this year, I've just read a lot of short stories that are set in, some of the romance series I read. I also got a lot of freebies at the beginning of 2021 that were short stories and novellas, so I've tried to read quite a lot of those as well. So this is a surprising number to me. I guess I just didn't think it was that many, because it's a significant number of books that I read that are under 100 pages. And this obviously plays into my average book length as well as how many pages I read for the year, I guess. With this many books that are shorter, obviously my total page count is going to be lower as well. And then the final number that I thought we'd look at in this video is when the books that I read were published. And I was a little surprised by this number because, most of the books that I read were published in 2020 and 2021, so fairly recent releases. And I'm always feeling like it takes me forever to get to new releases. So I was actually a little surprised to see this number because I expected there to be less newer releases in the stats. But apparently I'm not as bad as I feel like I am, because almost half of the books that I read were published in 2020 and 2021. So this was kind of surprising, but mostly in a good way. What this also tells me is that I haven't been great this year at getting to the books that have been on my TBR for a long time. That was kind of a goal at the beginning of the year, but I read some of them, but overall that wasn't really my focus for the year. So, but I'm happy that I'm getting to newer releases quicker than I thought. So, I guess overall I'm pretty happy with these stats. So that was what I wanted to go through in this video. Like I mentioned in the beginning, there are definitely some surprises in here. Some numbers that I really just didn't see coming. And then there were other things that just weren't surprising to me at all. Some significant changes as well compared to the year before, but again, not really surprising. I know that I've read a lot more romance this year. I know that I've read a lot more ebooks and things like that. So, this is just fun for me to look at. And I'm excited to look at the 2022 numbers eventually to see if there are more changes, because apparently my reading is just changing more than I'm expecting, and hopefully that page count can be a little bit higher at the end of this year as well. Not that it really matters, I was just really surprised by how significant a drop it was this year, especially since I wasn't really feeling like I was reading any less. But you know, when you looked at that audiobook number, it kind of made sense, I guess. But yeah, it will be interesting at the end of 2022 to see the numbers for this year. But yeah, I think that's going to be it for now. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, you can always hit like down below, or you can subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos from me. But that's going to be it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon with another video. Bye!